Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending the reconstruction of Penn Station. I'm Sarah Kaufman. I'm the interim director of the Rudin Center for Transportation. We are a hub of learning, collaboration, and change-making for the flow of people and goods in New York City. And today we're so excited to dive into this topic of Penn Station, one of the most discussed projects here in New York City. And I think we all know the famous Vincent Scully line that one enters New York City through Penn Station like a rat, through these maze-like tunnels underground. So I'm so glad that the MTA, Amtrak, and New Jersey Transit are collaborating to improve the station's function and form and flow. Today, Jamie Torres-Springer will tell us more about what reconstructing Penn Station is going to look like in the coming weeks, months, and years. Jamie, if you don't know him already, has been the president of MTA Construction and Development since 2021. He's responsible for managing and improving the MTA's $55 billion capital plan through innovative management of capital work for subways, buses, commuter railroads, and bridges and tunnels. And before joining the MTA, Jamie was the commissioner of the New York City Department of Design and Construction, the agency responsible for delivering infrastructure and facilities across New York City government. And during that time, Jamie was previously on a Rudin Center webinar focused on extreme weather and transportation, which is still an area of focus here at the Rudin Center. So clearly today we are thrilled to have one of the most intelligent infrastructure planners in the country right now. And I'm so glad he's working on Penn Station. So now he'll present the plan, strategy, and vision for the station, and then I'll dive deeper into the topic with him. And you can submit your questions in the Q&A below. So Jamie, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And we can go ahead and get started.
Great. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sarah, thank you. I appreciate the kind introduction. I was with you until the intelligent infrastructure planner part. You know, we at the MTA, we really value our partnership with the Rudin Center. You're right, I was on a webinar with you before. I actually knew that I was coming over to run construction and development at the MTA, but I don't think you did. So I recall being very nervous that I was going to say something, you know, too aggressive, counter to our interest. But so if anybody else watched that last webinar, I hope you didn't take anything I said too seriously. But certainly the resiliency of our system is a huge priority. And I look forward to having more conversation about that because we're doing lots of good work on climate resilience. I am here today with our project executive for Penn Reconstruction. I'm just gonna, because of some silly, embarrassing technical difficulties, Peter Matusewicz and I are sharing his laptop. So, but we work very closely together and are happy to be sitting here close to each other. I'll take us through a little bit of an overview of our master plan, and then Peter and I will be able to respond to questions. I appreciate everyone joining. This is a very exciting moment for us on the reconstruction of Penn Station. We are in the preliminary design stage, which we kicked off in June. The railroads, New Jersey Transit, the MTA, and Amtrak converged on a master plan over the last 3 years to fix Penn now for its, I think fair to say, long-suffering users, the 600,000 or so riders who use Penn Station every day, which is our focus in Penn Reconstruction. And so we have moved from that master plan into preliminary design, although what we're showing today is still the very conceptual renderings and drawings that we developed as part of the master plan. We're also excited because there's lots of interest. It's wonderful that so many people are on this webinar. You know, there's been lots of dialogue and interest and discussion. And really the way that I see it is that it's no longer a question of whether to rebuild Penn Station, it's a question of how. And that's a great place for us all to be as we work on such an important landmark for the city and transportation asset. Our vision is to make the reconstructed Penn Station a modern transportation hub that functions safely and intuitively and delivers an exceptional passenger experience. And I do want to emphasize, as we move through design, there are lots of opportunities for input and for consideration of other ideas that have emerged. But let me talk you through where we're at with our conceptual master plan. Next slide, please. We begin with and we focus on the experience and the safety of the station user. This is the busiest train station in North America by far, and it will continue to grow by any reasonable projection. Penn Station now handles more than twice the number of daily railroad passenger trips that the underground station was designed for in the 1960s. Of course, it was originally built 110 years ago, largely for intercity travel, and this is really critical. It's almost entirely a commuter station now, as you can see here. Amtrak intercity service, very important component of the station, but accounts for 6% of the 600,000 daily trips. And those trips, by and large, have moved or are moving into Moynihan Train Hall across 8th Avenue, where most of those passengers now board from. So more and more, the Penn Station that concerns us between 7th and 8th Avenue is a commuter station. And of course, as you see here, that ridership will continue to grow independent of Moynihan or any planned expansion related to the Gateway project to increase about 15% from 2019 ridership. That's really what our focus is those existing and future riders. Next slide, please. So how do we think about the needs and challenges of those commuters? Those that come from the street have trouble finding the place. The street entrances, as everyone knows, have poor visibility. They're lost in the busy Midtown streetscape. There are low ceilings in many of the concourses, in addition to feeling cramped and uncomfortable. And I really want to emphasize this as the entity that is responsible for the majority of ridership in the station. In addition to feeling cramped and uncomfortable, the low ceilings don't provide a smoke reservoir above head height. So the concourses can't remain, as we say, tenable long enough to get people out of the station safely. We need more head height, not only for comfort, but for smoke to rise so that the areas that are occupied by riders in an emergency at the ground level don't become filled with smoke too quickly for them to be able to get out. This is a really critical safety concern. And it's basically driven by the fact that our modern fire safety codes were created and implemented after Penn was rebuilt in the 1960s. The station also doesn't meet ADA accessibility standards. There are not enough stairs, elevators, escalators to the platforms, so they can't clear fast enough, both in normal conditions and in emergency. Crowding in parts of the station is severe, as everyone I'm sure on this call can agree. There's no daylight in the station to alleviate that subterranean rabbit warren feel. And there are not enough entrances and exits from the station. So again, it's not accessible. It's not comfortable for people to use it. And the building can't be evacuated quickly enough because the distance to an exit from the center of the station exceeds the allowable distance under building codes. This is our focus. On to the next slide, please. Fortunately, we have an opportunity to fix these problems. The station area is huge. It's 2 full city blocks from 33rd Street to 31st Street, from 7th Avenue to 8th Avenue. So there's a lot of opportunity. It's a very big area, but the layout is highly inefficient because of decades of uncoordinated development by the 3 railroads. The station has 2.5 public boarding levels squeezed between street level and the train shed underneath. Operations and building systems, which are the gray areas in the diagram, are balkanized and duplicated. So they account for more than half of the total station area, which squeezes out public circulation. Similarly with the building systems, especially, again, air circulation, which is important for passenger comfort, important in emergency conditions, are outdated and don't meet modern safety and energy efficiency standards. Overall, the station is a mystifying collection of undersized, incomplete concourses with poor sight lines and confusing travel paths. The layout, again, I emphasize this is a safety issue, hampering timely evacuation in the case of an emergency. Go ahead. One more important factor is where people are coming from. And from our surveys, in the future condition, that 2038 condition, even with all the development on the far west side, 70% of station users are going to be coming from 7th Avenue or the 8 train lines that converge at Herald Square on 6th Avenue, plus the 1, 2, and 3. And 30% will come from 8th Avenue or from the A, C, and E. And it's about an even split between them. So you can think of it like 15% of future station users or so are going to be coming from 8th Avenue above ground. The other, say 85% are coming from other locations. That's important. All of those riders are important. I want to emphasize that. But of course, where attention and dollars are limited, we tend to focus on where we're able to make the most difference and get the greatest bang for our buck. Go ahead. Thanks. I think we repeated this, so just go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. Fortunately, we have an opportunity to create the transportation benefits that I've been describing with a great new station, and we have a track record of doing that now. New York State built Moynihan Train Hall for Amtrak. The MTA has just finished the Long Island Railroad Concourse, which doubled the height and doubled the width of the east-west corridor along 33rd Street. And of course, we're able to do that because we had only the street itself and the utilities above it, rather than a second level that would have to be removed. That's how we're able to get that done. We created the new gateway entrance in the foreground on the right at 33rd and 7th Avenue. What are the characteristics of these spaces? They have height, which is important for comfort and for safety. They bring in natural light. They enable significant vertical circulation, entry from various points in the city outside, and also vertical circulation to and from the platforms. And the wayfinding is great. Those are the basic characteristics. What we want to do with the other 80% of the station. Long Island Railroad Concourse is 20%. The plan is to do that for the other 80%. Go on to the next slide, please. This treatment of 20, as I said, this treatment of 20% of the station points the way to the master plan for the other 80%. The solution is on the right. It's a single level station because all boarding and alighting of passengers and most public facing services will be on the lower level. To relieve congestion and make the public safe, we're going to need a lot more circulation space on the one public level, which is the light color on this before and after. You can see how much it's expanded. In fact, it expands to 240,000 gross square feet on that single level station, which is equivalent to 4 football fields. As I said, there's a lot of room in this station as long as we organize it properly. And as you can see to the right, the mid-block train hall, which is nearest to 7th Avenue on the far right, it's the largest public area because, as I noted, that's where the majority of passengers are. So we're focused on that. Go on to the next slide and we'll just show a couple of renderings. These are very conceptual, but you see the mid-block train hall, what it could look like running from 33rd Street, where we're standing, to 31st Street in this perspective. It rises up into the former taxiway between Madison Square Garden and the 2 Penn building. That taxiway has been closed and unused since 9/11, so this is putting it back into public use. And this becomes a central architectural feature of the station, where 70% of the passengers will be or will pass through. It'll have a 2-block long skylight all the way from 33rd Street to 31st Street, 100 feet high. The large new mid-block street entrances at each end, sort of where we're standing in this image, and at the 31st Street side, will improve accessibility, egress, and street visibility. But again, most importantly, they'll provide easily reached high-capacity exits where they're most needed in the case of an emergency. On to the next slide, where you can just see some of the precedents that inspire us, but the train hall that we've just described will be 75% larger than the areas of Moynihan Train Hall and the Great Hall at Grand Central combined. So it's a really huge opportunity, and we need it because this is the biggest station in North America. On the next slide, we have another view of it. The Madison Square Garden Bridge can be reconfigured to become part of the virtual composition of the train hall, which maximizes daylight. That's an important goal of the plan that we're working on further engineering for. And on the next slide, you can see as we move around the station, what a new center boulevard might look like along the station. This is shown looking from west to east. Everyone's familiar, or maybe most of you are familiar, try to block it out. The hated Hilton Passageway, which is in the center of the station. It runs equivalently to 32nd Street. This is the future of what that space would look like, with a double height ceiling, clear sight lines all the way across the station, retail, other public services arrange intuitively around this new center boulevard. So a great opportunity once you take out that upper level to create a single level station. On the next slide, you see what the 8th Avenue side of the station might look like, with new entrances at both corners and a unifying architectural treatment for the back wall of the area in the middle, which is formerly called the Hulu Theater. This is the change that will enliven the block-long dead zone on the east side of 8th Avenue. Another helpful perspective on this is on the next slide, where you're seeing the corner entrances to both the station and Madison Square Garden. Today, those entrances are undersized and unwelcoming, but by expanding them into the corner plazas at 33rd and 31st Street, we improve their functionality and visibility, and we still showcase the iconic Madison Square Garden drum. The reason we're focused on these entrances is that there is no 32nd Street west of 7th Avenue, so that roughly 15% of people I mentioned who enter from uptown or downtown along 8th Avenue or coming over from Hudson Yards will be coming down 33rd and 31st Streets, which is why we've prioritized those entrances. You know, as I said at the beginning, we're looking at other proposals. We're happy to look at it, but it's the, you know, sort of maximizing the public value we think is to focus on these entrances. Another view on the next slide, those new entrances bringing daylight into the station. I want to say that these entrances provide about 15,000 square feet of public circulation area on the 8th Avenue side. And on the next slide, you can see the new train hall that will be created on the 8th Avenue end of the station for that 30% of riders who will use that end of the station or pass through. On to the next slide, just to wrap up, to say we're excited about this plan to transform Penn into a civic space that's worthy of our customers in New York City. I'm sure a lot of you want to know and will ask what's happening next. We are in this preliminary design stage. We have a year of design to do. We're looking forward to commencing the federal environmental review process under NEPA. That and our design work will include stakeholder engagement. And what we're doing over the next year, in addition to advancing design, is determining how to structure delivery packages, fill in the additional funding needs during that time, and then we would move into procurement. Just to be clear, we're in a rush because we have to get as much work done as possible between now and 2027. We've taken some Long Island Railroad trains out of this train shed over to Grand Central with the implementation of Grand Central Madison. We're building Metro North's Penn Access project, which brings the New Haven line into Penn Station when we complete it in 2027. So in the meantime, we have to take advantage of lower use of the train shed. Those of you that know our work know it's all about the managing to critical outages to get important infrastructure work done. And so it's much easier for us to take tracks out of service when there are fewer tracks that are occupied. That's why that's our focus right now. That's a summary of the plan. Hope that was useful and not too long. I may just, again, sorry for the awkwardness here, but I'll just back us up here and bring in my friend Peter. And we're really happy to have a conversation with you about this.
Thank you, Jamie. Sorry, that echoed. That was really interesting to see and really heartening to see those renderings of the station. I have some questions ready for you, and then also we'll have I have some questions that participants have sent me by email, and participants, you're welcome to put things into the webinar chat or Q&A function. So in the meantime, I want to talk about ULURP, which didn't come up in your presentation, but I know it's top of mind. As an educational institution, can you get into ULURP 101? What is it? Why is it important right now? And how does it relate to Penn Station reconstruction?
Well, I think I'm going to leave the ULURP 101 to someone from the city who would be more capable than me of explaining that somewhat arcane process, which I've spent some time dealing with. But I think what you're referring to, Sarah, is that the city is considering the future of Madison Square Garden and whether to grant it and for what period of time to grant it a special permit extension, allowing it to continue to operate as an arena. with I think more than 2,500 users. That's the city's process and the city's decision to make. They have asked the railroads through a set of findings that they want to make, whether there is an opportunity to make the arena compatible with the station. And we've responded that there is, because there are some critical overlapping functions and property interests here. Particularly the taxiway and the 8th Avenue entrances that I described that are so critical to making this project work. Those are unused properties at this stage. And so in response to the city's request, we were, specified where there are opportunities for, through their process, what they're seeking to make the arena compatible with the station. Any sort of, more on that and what the city will decide to do, I leave to the city. But there is a great opportunity there. And we're very hopeful that we're able to come to some level of agreement on that.
Great. And can you get into a little bit what MTA and the other railroads hope to get out of the Euler process and kind of what the relationship with Madison Square Garden might entail going forward optimally?
Yeah, again, what the city has asked is how can the arena become compatible with the station? And we submitted a report to them at their request. It involves being able to use those underused properties, the taxiway and the 8th Avenue entrances, for our mid-block train hall and for those much improved entrances on 8th Avenue. There's a set of things that can be done together that are mutually beneficial. The biggest one is improving loading, which I know is a big concern for people that pay attention to Madison Square Garden and for the city. So we have an opportunity within our master plan to accommodate indoor loading for Madison Square Garden. And so that was another one of the things that in response to the city's compatibility questions, we said, that can be done. And it's really up to now, the city to determine, what their preferences are related to that, and obviously for Madison Square Garden as well.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'll just emphasize, it's a historic opportunity that we have right now. I mean, it's, for those Penn sufferers and Penn optimists out there, we're ready to go. And so, we want to take advantage of every opportunity that we have to effectuate those changes. And we really can't rebuild Penn without the cooperation of MSG.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned that now is the time to do this. Can you talk about why that is? What structures are in place and kind of incentives and penalties might be in place that necessitate the timing, the schedule that MTA is operating on?
Do you want to elaborate a little more on the 2027 timeline?
Sure. Part of it is just that we're going to have to do a fair amount of work in the train shed to move columns around, add columns, remove columns, and such like, in order to support a somewhat different structure above it. And it's hard to do that work when trains are running. So you're totally dependent upon time periods when you can close tracks. It can be anything from overnight to a weekend, but some kind of work needs even more extended. You might need a month of closure or such like. There are 21 tracks in Penn Station, and they're all used, except right now, there's a lot more flexibility to shift trains because Long Island Railroad has fewer trains running into the station. And this only is true until 2027. And then we lose that window. So we want to make that happen. Then the other kind of time constraint is the infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure law, which has made available historic levels of funding for rail. Right? The government has always funded highways very generously and has underfunded rail for many decades. And the infrastructure law has changed that. But the backlog of projects is enormous. We have to be able to demonstrate to the USDOT that we're ready to move this project, or the money will go to other projects, other worthy projects that are ready to go.
Yeah, so that certainly makes the case for the timing. I do have questions about the Penn reconstruction. So you touched on the three primary aspects about usability, safety, and function. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about kind of the passenger experience. I think Moynihan Station is phenomenal. It's a lovely experience, and it's a great place to be and to grab your train and meet up with people. I'm wondering if there is going to be consideration for things like seating and expanding kind of the waiting areas and or the food hall to make it more of an experience than it is now.
Yeah, for sure. There's a great opportunity to do that. You know, as we showed, you know, we're really underusing all that space. We got basically back of house occupies half of the area, more than half of the area of the station. In the future master plan, I think we're showing the opportunity to accommodate at least 100,000 square feet of retail or
about 125,000.
Yeah. So, you know, the one thing that's important to keep in mind about this, I said it at the beginning, this is a commuter station, and commuter stations work a little bit differently than intercity rail stations. You know, there's sort of a spectrum from commuter, intercity rail to think of an airport, right? I mean, you're showing up really early to go to an airport. So, you know, and also you're, you know, unfortunately, you know, often you're arriving, you know, by vehicular transportation. So it sort of doesn't matter if you take you out of your way a little bit. You know, have a long walk through the terminal and so on. You have enough time because you showed up early. Same thing, you know, with Moynihan, which is great. I mean, I love Moynihan. I've taken to sort of, you know, meeting friends at the bar there very frequently. You know, it's sort of, that's kind of got the intercity character where you are showing up somewhat early. I think we can get to a lot of that. You know, I'm very excited. We're going to be, you know, we're looking to open sort of bar and restaurant space in Grand Central Madison very soon. We're getting to that point with some of the additional work that had to be done after opening. So, you know, you've got those amenities, you've got convenience retail that works, quite a lot of it. But, you know, at the same time, we have to recognize it's a little different than an intercity rail terminal. You know, those of us, you know, sort of probably everybody on this call takes the commuter railroad, you show up 5 minutes before your train. If you miss the train, you know, you might take the next train. You're not showing up an hour or two early. So not to say that there aren't going to be those amenities. It's just a little bit, we have to think about it a little bit differently than Moynihan.
Yeah, that is interesting. There was the woman squatting in the middle of the photo of Moynihan in your presentation, and so that brought it to mind. But on that topic of the function of the station, one discussion that comes up a lot is the topic of through running. Can you explain the concept of through running to the audience and talk about how that applies here or doesn't apply here?
Well, I think, you know, I somewhat defer to my colleagues from Amtrak in particular, who have been spending a lot of time really in the lead on this issue. You know, as you know, they've expressed somewhat different opinions, but I think, you know, if you just talk to the core Amtrak folks, I think they would be good to sort of take the lead on responding to that. We are conducting a feasibility study as part of the environmental review that looks at the opportunities for through running, whether through Penn Station or adjacent to Penn Station through the future expansion. So we expect to have some results of that. And it's really, you know, as I say, because Amtrak is, while we're an important, very important partner, Amtrak's in the lead on the Penn expansion, it's a good question to ask them what their thoughts are.
Okay, we'll have to have another event with Amtrak then.
Yeah, I recommend it.
Yeah. Okay. And perhaps it'll be at the Moynihan Station bar as well. I did receive some questions from some of the audience members that ask important questions about the reconstruction itself, the work itself. What I think the top one is, you know, what kind of jobs will be created in the construction process for the community and local residents?
That's a great question. We're a little ahead of some of those decisions. I will say, this project budget is very significant. So there's a pretty, just if you look at, I used to be an economic analyst in a previous life. So if you look at that, both the direct and the indirect and the induced spending, that comes from that, that's a lot of support for people locally through businesses indirectly or through, direct employment. I also want to say, Sarah, I'm glad you asked. We're really excited about local hiring at the MTA within our construction program. It was actually challenging to do it because of certain federal rules that were out there that the Biden administration has modified. So we have been piloting this in the Jamaica bus depot that we're rebuilding. This is the first electrified bus depot that we're building. I might get this slightly wrong, but I believe in the big reconstruction project we have of a portion of the A-train on the Rockaways, and on a third project, I'm not going to say what it is because I might get it wrong, but we have asked our contractors to commit to 20% local hiring. We're excited. I think we are going to see those results. There's, we did some work to set the 20%. We need to see how they do. It's a really great opportunity, but it's not enough because we want to be a pipeline to skilled labor opportunities. I mean, there's, we need to create opportunities all up and down the economic spectrum. But we're looking for ways in our mega projects, Second Avenue Subway Phase 2 being the primary among them at the moment, to create pre-apprenticeship opportunities that provide a pipeline into apprenticeships on the project. So it's not just about local hiring, it's about the quality of the jobs that are accessible to people and what kind of pipeline that creates. And we've had a great dialogue with labor on that so far, and I'm really excited about the opportunities we have there.
Great, and I imagine that you'll have special pipelines for MWBE businesses and working with local workforce development organizations. Is that right?
Absolutely. In our construction program, we did over $800 million in payments to M and W minority women business owned enterprises last year, over 800 the year before. We make up something like a third of the state's MWBE expenditure, despite the fact that we're one of something like 90 entities within the state. So it's a huge focus for our program. We're always looking for other opportunities for that. And we certainly are continuing to set goals that are very aggressive, and we're meeting those goals. I mean, we're not handing out waivers. We're meeting the goals, and our contractors are doing a great job of meeting those goals.
Excellent. And so not just diversity in hiring, but also diversity of opinions. This is New York City. Everyone has an opinion or five. How will the reconstruction of Penn Station incorporate community members' feedback and goals and needs in the plans and throughout the construction process?
Yeah, well, I want to say, first of all, it already has. I mean, the master plan was done in consultation with many, many stakeholders. I see some of them are on the Zoom today, and we continue to have that dialogue. And we will have a public engagement process as we move through design and particularly through the NEPA process. So we'll have more details of that soon. But yeah, there's lots of opportunity for input here.
Excellent. And so what are the next steps for the reconstruction of Penn Station? What can we expect to see in the coming weeks and months and years? What are the upcoming milestones for the project?
Yeah, so we're moving ourselves through preliminary design. That means in the sort of technical terms, we take ourselves to roughly 30% design a year from now, which at the end of that stage, we have thinking that we're doing about how exactly we're going to contract for the work to be done. But at the end of that stage, we'll be ready to do some of that contracting. As Peter was alluding to, pulling the funding together is critical, very complicated. We're very fortunate that the governor has made this a huge priority of her administration. And we have a state appropriation already of $1.3 billion. We have agreement by the three railroads to fund the stage that we're in, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, the design stage that we're in. We are prioritized on the Northeast Corridor project priority list. and we have applications in for the stage that we're in for some of that federal funding under the IIJA that Peter was describing. Identifying the additional funding, particularly federal funding, is important. We're looking to get that feasibility study out and get into a fuller stage of NEPA review, which will involve public consultation. Those are the big pieces of this, and all of it headed towards getting us substantial work done before that 2027 deadline.
Excellent. And what we did receive a question. How does you briefly mentioned NEPA? How does the preliminary design fit into the NEPA review timeline?
Great question for my friend here. Yeah,
sure. We anticipate in our discussions with USD DOT and the Federal Railroad Administration in particular, we're anticipating that the review will be what's called an environmental assessment, a step down from environmental impact statement, given that it's essentially the renovation of a building. And the timeline for that is by statute, it must be completed 12 months after FRA says go. They have not said go yet. We're still doing engineering that's preliminary to being able to do an environmental assessment. So, a number of alternatives are considered in the assessment. A preferred alternative is developed by the railroads and FRA. There's an opportunity for public comment, and that'll all wind up. We will certainly start that by the end of the year. So most of that will be occurring in 2024.
Okay, so that's coming up. And so Jamie, you referred to the one third. So the 1/3 that we're in now is the design phase. Is that right?
That's right.
And so the second phase is construction?
Yeah.
Great. And then the third phase?
I think I was referring to something about how we're funding it.
Okay.
We're really, we could divide into different thirds of stages, but really it's getting through preliminary design, procurement and construction.
Yeah. Got it.
We can call the third one the happy and safe operation of Penn Station. How about that?
Fantastic. That's something I look forward to. I am wondering if any audience members have submitted questions. So Shannon, who's here from NYU, has been monitoring. Shannon, are there any questions from the audience in the Q&A? Okay, not yet. Great. Is there anything that you can speak about the significance of this moment? New Yorkers are used to starts and fits, especially in terms of the 2nd Avenue subway. How do we avoid the reconstruction of Penn Station becoming something like that, where construction starts and stops and the funding comes and goes? How can we ensure that this actually gets done?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. There's a few different answers to that question. I just want to be clear that when 2nd Avenue subway started construction, it got finished. I understand that people had some concerns about how exactly that was done. So there's a couple different levels to that answer. The first is, and many people on this call know this, but we created a separate agency, MTA Construction and Development, about 4 years ago. It was created by my predecessor in this job and now my boss, Jana Lieber. And the goal of that was to really take advantage of opportunities that we have to manage this capital delivery more efficiently and effectively. That's a whole other presentation, which I love giving, about the opportunities that we've had and taken advantage of to contain cost. It comes down to things like much more effective planning in advance, and thinking about what we really can achieve and what's most important to achieve. So getting the scope right up front, the delivery vehicle. Peter is, one of our project CEOs who is empowered to manage the project from start to finish. and to use innovative contracting techniques. We've made extraordinary use of design build. We've done a P3. We are using progressive design build. We expect to award that this year in one case. We're also using something, a little arcane called A+B, which is when we actually still do need to fully design a project, but we heavily incentivize our contractor to complete it in a timely fashion. I see one of my colleagues here, Tom Abdallah, is on. Tom is single-handedly, boiling each of our massive prescriptive specs down to performance-based specs. He can't speak for himself, so I'll say he's promised to get it down to just a few pages per RFP, from hundreds of pages. Just all of this stuff, we're just modernizing the hell out of this agency, and we're going to be able to take advantage of that. Second Avenue Subway Phase 2 will start this year. We've saved at least $1 billion already, from looking at the lessons learned from Phase 1 and incorporating them, some of the ways that I've described. The second thing is we have all the railroads together. So, these are the people who need to be on board with getting this work done. So as we get it designed through environmental review, get the funding in place, we should be in a good position to deliver the project.
Excellent. And I'm so glad you brought up Second Avenue Subway, because that's also under your purview. Can you give us a little taste of what we can expect for that?
Sure. Again, another,
I know it's off topic, but
no, it's okay. Another whole presentation. So, this is extending Second Avenue Subway up from 96th Street, up to 125th Street, and then west to connect to the Lexington Avenue line and Metro North, at Lexington and Park Avenue. The project is, we have, basically roughly half of the cost of the project is on the MTA within our capital program. The other half is from a grant from the federal government. And so we needed to, I think everyone here understands congestion pricing is not only a great benefit to our region, but also all of the proceeds are to be dedicated to MTA capital work. And so we needed the FONSI, the finding of no significant impact from the federal government, which we have, that says that we can proceed with congestion pricing, and the tolling regime. And so now we know we have that funding available. We're moving towards the final grant agreement with the feds. And at the same time, we've released the first bid package. Early work, a lesson learned, get the utilities out of the way in a timely fashion so they're not holding us up. We're pushing through any of the property acquisitions we need. Another thing that always holds you up, getting the work done. So that's all happening. We should be able to award that early work package this year, and that takes us into getting, it's a very small number of contracts. Another big lesson learned, particularly, I was here for the end of East Side Access. Too many contracts, contractors, great people, they love to point at each other, as to why work hasn't been completed in a timely way. We just have 4 big packages here, and we'll be getting those out into procurement over the next couple of years, so that we're getting to work and getting to complete that project. It's going to be a great project.
Excellent. I'm a heavy user of the Second Avenue Subway now, so I'm excited to see it move forward.
It's great. Yeah, and I just also want to say, we continue to, as I said, we've looked every which way at how to deliver it more efficiently. We're continuing to do that. We have work happening right now on looking at cost saving opportunities between MTA Construction and Development and the Department of Subways and the ops planning folks at New York City Transit. All this work is ongoing. There are opportunities, but at the same time, I think I always remind people, one of the reasons that it does, no matter how much cost cutting we do, it costs a lot of money is because we're building a transit system through the densest part of the United States for the highest number of users. We're adding 100,000 daily users from Second Avenue Subway Phase 2. That's the size of most other transit systems. And when you look at what I think is a very important metric, and Sarah, I'm sorry, I'll shut up after this, but you invited it. The cost per average daily rider, which is the best metric of cost benefit for an investment is like a third for Second Avenue Subway of all the other projects that people benchmark. So you can say, oh, you know, it's expensive per mile. I agree, it's expensive per mile. And that's because we're building through density. It's also because we can take advantage of some opportunities to contain costs. But that expense is the lowest cost per average daily rider that you can find. It's a great investment. So, you know, I'm not saying we're dismissing opportunities to contain cost. We're very conscious of it. We're very honest about it. We're confronting these problems at the MTA today, but also it's a very cost beneficial project.
That's a really interesting metric, which I hadn't heard discussed in that way before. That's really smart to consider it the cost per rider. And thank you for diving into that with me, going down that road a bit.
Anytime. Yeah.
And on the topic of cost, we did receive an audience question asking if you can speak a bit more about delivery packages, whether you're considering some sort of P3 agreement where the constructor partly finances the station and then operates and maintains it.
It's a, you know, we actually, it's in our working scope that we are going to look at our delivery options. And it's you know, it's an active conversation with Amtrak and New Jersey Transit and the MTA. I mentioned that we are, you know, we are using a P3. We awarded a P3 at the end of last year to make 8 stations in our subway system ADA accessible. You know, there are certain advantages to it. One thing that you know for sure, though, is that it costs more in a case like Penn Station. You can anticipate, because, you know, just to be clear, it's basically the same kind of design, build, delivery method that we have. Contractors incentivized to deliver on budget and on time, but you have to fund their private capital. And, you know, private equity and private debt cost more than the debt that we put into projects. So we can anticipate it would be anywhere from 30 to 50% more expensive over time to use a P3. There may be a good reason to do it. We may say, you know, man, we're going to save so much money from this that it makes sense to do that. But I just want to be clear, you know, it's not like a magic bullet here that automatically saves you money. It's likely going to cost you more money.
Well, it's good to know that you're considering all options. Another question that we received is if one or both of you can speak about the logistics of coordinating with the different agencies involved in the project, like perhaps the different railroads and city, state, interstate agencies. What kind of challenges are you coming across, if you can speak to those, and what do you need to coordinate in terms of decision making?
Sure. So the 3 railroads are working on a consensus basis. The staffs work together. We make our decisions together. There's a steering committee that provides a certain amount of guidance and referees disagreements amongst the staff, should there be any. We have not had any disagreements amongst the staff so far on the design project, but, you know, over 12 months, yeah, we're going to have a few. And it could be escalated beyond that if necessary, all the way up to the CEOs of the railroad. So there's a clear process in place so that we don't get stuck anywhere. The process is largely driven by our designers. These are professionals who do this, you know, for a living. They know train stations really well. So they advise us. And that is one of the things that helps us get past, you know, some of the disagreements we sometimes have. Now, we're going to, of course, be seeking federal funding for the project. So FRA is our good buddy. Any money we get for this project will come through the FRA. The environmental review is done for them, right? The federal action that requires environmental review is funding of the project. So we do the environmental study on their behalf, and which means that we're talking all the time. And they have to be satisfied that we're ready to go. They have to be satisfied with the conclusions we reach. And of course, you know, because they fund so many things, they go through so many of these environmental processes. They know where the fault lines lie. They know where you get in trouble and where you don't. Keep us on the straight and narrow, so to speak. And there are no bi-state agencies involved in this directly. But the governor's offices in the two states have committed to the project and are providing oversight and direction as well. And then there's the public outreach, the stakeholders and other organizations. Part of the environmental process is the review of impacts or potential impacts to historic properties, for instance. So the State Historic Preservation Office weighs in on that. And it's kind of the same thing, you know, that they do this all the time. They know how to do this. They get to the point really quickly. And that process involves yet another public outreach process that's mandated under the National Historic Preservation Act. And we have an environmental consultant who does this all the time. So they know how to navigate all of these agencies and all of the stakeholders. We rely upon our consultants a great deal because of their experience.
Well, I think maybe you're going to set a record for the longest stretch of interagency work without conflict, and so hopefully it'll continue. I do have one final question from the audience, which is that on the slide where you showed projected ridership numbers for 2038, that this person says that it seems somewhat pessimistic that there's only 13% growth in ridership projected over the span of 19 years. Is that, do you agree that it's a kind of pessimistic view? Do you see it as an impact of COVID or another factor? Can you get more into where those projected numbers come from, and how you might consider them in terms of pessimism or optimism going forward?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a pretty, well, Peter's just because they're his estimates, but it's pretty middle of the road. But the thing we need to be clear about is this is not, you know, the additional, passenger activity that results from Gateway, from the expansion of capacity, which is particularly a big increase in New Jersey Transit trains. That's not, this is just existing Penn, which can't accommodate that. So that's outside of this. Anything you want to add?
Right. I mean, the overall growth is going to be about 50%, which is why we need to expand the station. The growth we're citing in these is the background growth of users of Penn Station itself, who will not be in the expansion. We've kicked around a lot the changes in patterns due to COVID and to hybrid work from home. And we're following the lead again of USDOT on this. The Federal Railroad Administration, which did extensive studies of what's needed in the entire Northeast corridor from Boston to Washington, called NEC Future. And then they looked at, okay, there's more than 150 projects that could be involved in that. So they did a first phase analysis that they call Connect 2035, which is sort of the first 15 years of that development of the entire concourse. And they published that document in 2021, and they had to take up the question of how will patterns change. All the railroads involved and all the metropolitan planning organizations had pooled all of their projections of travel demand to inform NEC Future. And what FRA concluded was that it is likely that the increases in ridership that were projected, in certain increments. So, for instance, projected for 2030 will likely not be achieved until about 2035. That the growth will slow because of the change in travel patterns and in work patterns, but that the growth will happen. So we're taking our lead from that. So to us, it doesn't matter if we achieve those numbers in 2038 or 2045. We've got to accommodate it either way.
Okay, well, I can't wait to see what the actual numbers are for the reconstructed Penn Station. Thank you for diving into that a bit more. So it looks like that's all the time we have for today. Really, thank you so much, Jamie and Peter. Thank you for your time and for your expertise and for shining a spotlight on this process. And we're very excited for the new Penn Station. If it looks anything like the renderings, it'll be phenomenal. Better flow, better safety, better functionality. So thank you very much. It's been enlightening, and hopefully you'll come back in a few months and then in a few years to update us on the progress.
Thanks, Sarah. We really appreciate it. The Rudin Center is a great partner to the MTA, and you personally are. And we appreciate this opportunity. We'll talk about this plan anytime. In fact, I think we're talking about it to Community Board 5 in a similar forum on Thursday night. So, please stay tuned for more information on this. And thanks for the time. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, and thanks everyone.